There is a kind of love that never gets acknowledged. No card for it, no holiday, no moment where somebody looks you in the eye and says, "Thank you for staying." You just wake up every morning and choose it again, quietly, without applause. I did that for 14 years, and the boy I did it for looked me dead in the face and told me I was not worthy to be at his graduation. My name is Jacob Scott. I'm a truck driver out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. I haul freight across 4 states and sleep in, rest stops off I-40. I don't own a suit that didn't come off a clearance rack at Dillard's. But for 14 years I showed up for a boy who never once asked me to. And the night he told me to disappear from his graduation, I left something on that kitchen table that changed everything. Stay with me because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you will love it here. I met Betty at a church potluck in the fall of 2008. The kind of evening where folding chairs scraped against linoleum floors and people balanced paper plates on their palms like it was second nature. Someone had brought a speaker that crackled every time the volume changed, and there was a long table against the far wall filled with casseroles, desserts, and things people swore were homemade whether they were or not. Betty stood near the middle of it all with a glass dish in her hands. Peach cobbler. I remember that clearly, not because I have any special love for peaches, but because she held it like it mattered, like she had put care into it, like it wasn't just something she made to bring, it was something she made to give. I hadn't brought anything. Michael had told me it was a cookout, and Michael has never been a reliable source of information in his life. He guesses, fills in gaps, and moves on like accuracy is optional. So I showed up empty-handed and realized my mistake the second I stepped inside. Betty noticed. She laughed, not in a way that made me feel small, but in a way that made the whole thing lighter. Like it wasn't a problem, just a detail. "You didn't bring anything?" she asked, smiling. "I was misinformed," I said. "I trusted a man I shouldn't have." "That's usually how trouble starts," she replied. There was something easy about her. Not loud, not trying too hard, just steady, the kind of presence that makes you feel like you've stepped out of noise and into something quieter without realizing it. We talked for a while that night. Nothing heavy. Just small things, work, weather, people we both knew in passing. I left thinking about her more than I expected to. Our second date was where things shifted. We were sitting in a diner on College Avenue. One of those places that serves coffee that's always a little too hot and never quite strong enough. She had both hands wrapped around her mug, like she was holding on to something. "I need to tell you something," she said. The way she said it made me straighten up a little. Not tense, just attentive. "I have a son. His name's Ryan, he's 8. I nodded. "Okay." She didn't relax. "His father is still around," she added carefully. "We've been done for 3 years, but he's in the picture." I took a second, not because I needed to think about the answer, but because I wanted to give it properly. "That means you have a son," I said. "I heard you." She studied my face like she was waiting for the part where I reconsidered. Where I leaned back, made an excuse, started creating distance. "Most men don't stay when they hear that," she said. "I'm still here." And I was. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that staying would become the quiet center of everything that followed. I met Ryan a week later. He was smaller than I expected, not in a way that worried me, just in a way that made him look younger than his age. He had Betty's eyes, sharp, observant, but there was something guarded in them that didn't belong to a child. He shook my hand when she introduced us. Firm grip, direct eye contact. Then he turned and went back to his room without another word. I stood there for a second, then looked at Betty. "He's polite," I said. "He's careful," she replied. That was the better word. Careful. It didn't take long to understand why. Kids who grow up watching people leave don't waste energy getting attached. They learn early how to hold back. I didn't try to change that. I didn't show up with gifts or forced enthusiasm. I didn't try to fill a role that hadn't been offered to me. I just stayed present, quietly, consistently. When Betty and I got married in 2010, Ryan was 10. He stood at the end of the aisle in a suit that looked like it had been adjusted twice and still didn't fit right. He didn't smile for any of the pictures. At first I thought maybe he was upset. Later, I realized something else. He wasn't pretending. That was something I came to respect about him. Even back then, the first year we lived together felt like a long, quiet negotiation. Not arguments, not tension, just space. I didn't push into it. I drove him where he needed to go when Betty worked late. Picked him up from school. Sat in the same room without trying to fill the silence. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd park outside the school at 5:15 for football practice pickup. Same time, same spot. He'd get in the truck, drop his bag by his feet and look out the window. 45 minutes of silence. Most people think silence is uncomfortable. It's not. Silence is honest. You can't fake it. And over time, something started to shift inside it. Not all at once. Not in a way you could point to and say, there it is. Just small things. One afternoon, he asked me to turn the radio down instead of just reaching for it himself. Another time, he mentioned something about practice without being asked. Then one Thursday, out of nowhere, he said, "Coach says you don't watch." I glanced over. "I watched last week. You left early. You told me not to hover." He thought about that for a second, then shrugged. "You can watch if you want." That was it. 4 words. But I understood what they meant. The next practice, I stood on the sideline. Cold wind cutting through my jacket. Lights buzzing overhead. And I watched him. Not just casually. Not the way you look at something to pass time. I paid attention. The way he moved. The way he focused. The way he didn't quit on plays even when they went bad. I felt something then I didn't try to name. Maybe pride. Maybe something close to it. You don't need a title for that kind of feeling. You just feel it, and you hold on to it. What I didn't see, not clearly, not fully, was what was happening at the same time in quieter spaces. Inside conversations I wasn't part of. Inside the way Betty spoke to him when I wasn't in the room. She didn't say anything harsh. That's the part that took me years to understand. If she had been openly negative, I would have seen it. Addressed it, fought it. But it wasn't like that. It was softer. Careful, strategic in a way that didn't feel like strategy. "Jacob works hard," she'd say. "But he's on the road a lot. You can't always depend on a schedule like that." Or, "He's a good man. I just don't want you getting too comfortable. People change." Or, "Just keep a little distance, just in case." Never loud, never direct, just enough to plant something. And once something is planted in a child's mind, it doesn't need much to grow. By the time Ryan was 12, I had been there for every practice. Every pickup. Every small ordinary moment that makes up a life. And still there was a line he didn't cross. Not because he didn't feel anything, but because he had been taught, quietly, that feeling too much was dangerous. When he was 15, something almost happened. We were sitting in the living room watching a game. He said, "Hey, Da," and stopped. Caught himself. Corrected it. "Jacob?" He went red in the face like he'd said something wrong. I didn't react. Didn't make it a moment. But I remember it. You don't forget something like that. What I didn't know at the time was that Betty had spoken to him that night. I don't know exactly what she said. But I know this. He never came close again. That's when I started to understand. Not fully, but enough that something wasn't just distance. It was direction. Ryan wasn't just holding back on his own. He was being guided there. And Betty wasn't trying to hurt me. That matters. She wasn't cruel. She was afraid. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like preparation. She had been left before. Not once, twice. And that kind of history changes how you see stability. It turns something good into something temporary in your mind. Something you don't trust. So when I showed up and stayed, she didn't relax. She waited. And while she waited, she made sure Ryan wouldn't fall too far into something she believed might disappear. The problem was, I wasn't going anywhere. Not then, not later, not ever. But she didn't believe that. And because she didn't believe it, she built distance where there didn't need to be any. Ryan grew up inside that. He thought he was being smart, careful, protecting himself. But he wasn't protecting himself from me. He was protecting himself from a version of me that didn't exist. And I kept doing what I had always done. Driving the truck, coming home, showing up, signing forms, fixing things, sitting in silence when that's what was needed, talking when it was offered. I didn't demand anything, didn't correct him, didn't push for a title or recognition, because love like that, real love, it doesn't ask to be noticed. It just stays. And I stayed for 14 years, not because it was easy, but because I had already made the decision, and I don't undo decisions like that, even when they hurt, even when they go unacknowledged, even when the person you're showing up for doesn't fully understand what you're giving. I stayed, and that was the wound. Not the silence, not the distance, but the quiet realization that no matter how consistently you show up, if someone has been taught not to reach for you, they won't, not until something breaks. And something always does. Now I need to tell you about Tommy Hayes, because nothing that happened later makes sense without him. Tommy and I go back to a time before responsibilities had weight, before bills, before marriages, before people started leaving or staying in ways that mattered. We went to high school together in Fayetteville, played ball, got into the kind of trouble that doesn't ruin your life but teaches you where the edges are. Worked summers at a lumber yard on Dixon Street, stacking boards in heat that made the air feel thick enough to chew. Tommy was always the sharper one. He had a way of seeing 2 steps ahead, even back then. While I was figuring out what needed to be done next, Tommy was already thinking about what came after that. He never let me forget it either. Not in a mean way, just honest. After graduation, our paths split the way they tend to. I went into trucking. It made sense to me. I liked the road, the structure of it, the clarity. You pick something up, you take it somewhere else, you deliver it. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. No guessing. Tommy went to college on a scholarship. University of Arkansas first, then law school at Vanderbilt. Came back to Fayetteville after that and built something real. A firm with his name on it. Hayes, Greer and Associates. Family law, estate planning, civil cases. The kind of place people go when life gets complicated and they need someone who understands how to untangle it. We didn't talk every day. Didn't need to. We were the kind of friends where time doesn't wear anything down. Months could pass, even longer sometimes, and when we picked up the phone, it was like nothing had shifted. No catching up required beyond the basics, just right back into conversation. That kind of friendship is rare. People think they have it more often than they actually do. When Ryan started college, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. Not because I was suddenly trying to prove something. Not because I expected anything in return. Just because I had watched that kid for years, and I knew how his mind worked. He chose pre-law. That didn't surprise me. He had always been precise, careful with words, the kind of person who listens all the way through before responding. That alone sets someone apart more than people realize. There were nights he'd sit at the kitchen table going over notes, outlining arguments, muttering to himself under his breath. He thought I wasn't paying attention. I usually had the television on, something low and forgettable. But I was listening. You can learn a lot about someone by how they think out loud. He didn't rush conclusions. He built them, step by step, like he was assembling something that had to hold weight. That's when the idea started forming. Not all at once, not in a way I could point to. Just a quiet thought that stayed around longer than most. Tommy. That connection sat in the back of my mind for a while before I acted on it. I wasn't going to ask for a favor. That part was clear from the beginning. Ryan had never called me anything more than Jacob. Never asked me for anything beyond what was necessary. There was no shared understanding between us that would justify me stepping in and asking someone like Tommy to open a door for him. But I could talk, so I did. The first time it was casual. We were having lunch at a place Tommy liked. Brisket sandwiches, nothing fancy. He asked about life, work, the usual. I mentioned Ryan. Studying pre-law, I said. Doing well. Tommy nodded. Good field if he sticks with it. He will. Tommy glanced at me just for a second. Not long, but long enough to register something behind the statement. You sound sure. I am. That was it for that conversation. I didn't push. Over the next few months, I brought Ryan up again here and there. Not in a way that sounded like a pitch, just information. He made the dean's list. He's been doing moot court. He's serious about it. Tommy listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't commit to anything. Just took it in. One afternoon, maybe a year into those conversations, he set his drink down and looked at me more directly. "How come you're doing this?" he asked. I took a second. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted it to be the right one. "Because somebody should," I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. "All right." That was all he said. But I knew something had shifted. After that, the conversations became more specific. Tommy started asking questions. Grades, focus, work ethic. I answered what I knew. Never exaggerated. Never filled in gaps. If I didn't know something, I said so. That mattered to Tommy, always had. By Ryan's junior year, Tommy wasn't just listening anymore. He was considering. I could see it in the way he asked things. The way he paused before responding. The way he didn't dismiss anything. And by the time Ryan reached his final year, Tommy had made a decision. He didn't announce it, didn't frame it like a favor. He just said it plainly over coffee one morning. "When he graduates, send me his transcripts." I nodded. "We'll take a look." That was Tommy's way of saying yes without making it sound like yes. But it was more than that. He had already made space. What I didn't know until later was that he had quietly held a junior associate position open, turned down other candidates, waited, not because Ryan had asked, not because of anything Ryan had done directly for him, but because I had shown up for 14 years without asking for anything. Tommy noticed that. He always notices things like that. Around the same time, I started saving for something else. The car. Now I need to explain this part properly. I am a truck driver. I make a living that keeps things steady. But it doesn't leave room for big gestures unless you plan them carefully, unless you sacrifice for them. This wasn't an impulse. This was years of small decisions. Extra runs when I could have said no. Holidays spent parked at rest stops, eating food that comes out of vending machines or wrapped in paper you don't trust. Saying no to things I wanted. Michael invited me to go fishing at Table Rock Lake more times than I can count. I wanted to go. Every time. But I didn't. Because I had seen something. Ryan had a habit. He'd flip through magazines sometimes, car magazines mostly. Not often, and never when he thought someone was paying attention. Dark blue Dodge Chargers. Always the same color. He'd look at them, then tear out the page. Sometimes he'd pin it up. Sometimes he'd take it down. Like wanting something that much felt like exposure. Like it gave something away. I noticed. I always noticed. So I started putting money aside. Slowly, carefully. No announcements. No tracking out loud. Just quiet progress. It took time, more than I expected. But eventually it became real. I bought the car 18 months before his graduation. Didn't bring it home. Didn't park it where he'd see it. I left it with Tommy. Safer that way. Simpler. Everything was coming together in pieces. The job, the car, the timing, all of it leading to one moment. Graduation. I kept everything in a white envelope. Offer letter from Tommy's firm. Details printed clean and formal. Salary. Benefits. Bar exam study leave. A future, laid out in a way that made sense. And the key. Just the key. No fob. Ryan had once said keychains were unnecessary. Extra. I remembered that. I remembered everything about him, even the things he didn't think mattered. I kept that envelope in the inside pocket of my coat. Carried it with me the week leading up to graduation. Didn't tell Betty. Didn't tell anyone. Some things don't need an audience. They just need to be done. June in Fayetteville has a way of starting soft, before the heat settles in, before the air gets heavy. Ryan's graduation was on a Saturday. Clear sky. The kind of day people remember without trying. He was 22. Standing there in that cap and gown, he looked certain. Not about everything. No one ever is. But about enough. Enough to move forward. Larry was coming in from Dallas for the graduation dinner. First time he'd been back in 2 years. That didn't seem to matter to Ryan. Or maybe it did. Just not in the way I would have expected. He was excited, checking his phone, laughing more than usual. There's a certain kind of energy someone carries when they're waiting. For the person they've placed highest in their world. That's what it was, and I understood something in that moment without needing to say it out loud. I wasn't that person. I hadn't been for a long time. Maybe I never was. And that was all right. I had already accepted my place. I was in the kitchen before we left, wiping down counters, straightening chairs, keeping busy. That's what I do when something feels bigger than I want to sit with. The envelope was in my coat by the door. I planned to give it to him later, at dinner. Something simple, no big speech, just handing it over. I heard him come down the stairs behind me. I turned, already smiling. "Hey," I said. "You look." "Jacob." The way he said my name stopped the rest of the sentence before it could finish. There was something measured in his voice, prepared. "I need to tell you something." I set the dishcloth down. "All right." He took a small breath. "The best thing you can do for me today is not come to my graduation." For a second, the room didn't feel like it had any air in it. Not because of the words, because of how calmly they were delivered. "You're not my real dad," he added. "You're just Jacob. Just Jacob." He adjusted his blazer, turned, walked back upstairs. No hesitation, no second look. Just done. I didn't move right away. Didn't react. I just stood there, letting it settle. Then I looked up. Betty was standing in the hallway. She had heard everything. I could see it in her face. The stillness, the way she didn't step forward. Didn't say anything, didn't correct him. Our eyes met. For a second, maybe two, and then she turned. Followed him upstairs, quiet. That was the moment everything became clear. Not just what had been said, but everything that had led to it. 14 years. Every drive. Every silence. Every effort made without expectation. And in the one moment where something could have been said, she chose not to. That wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment in the way people usually mean it. It was clarity, clean and final. I walked to my coat, reached into the pocket, took out the envelope, held it for a second, then set it on the kitchen table. Placed the key on top. Simple. Exact. The way it was always meant to be. And in that moment, something in me shifted. Not broken, just understood. I didn't go to the graduation. That part is simple to say now. It wasn't complicated in the moment either. Once Ryan said what he said, there wasn't anything left to debate. He had made his position clear, and I had spent 14 years respecting his boundaries, even when they weren't spoken out loud. I wasn't going to stop on the one day it mattered most to him. So I left. Not in a hurry, not in anger. I didn't slam the door or make any kind of scene that could be remembered later as something else, something louder than it needed to be. I pulled the door shut behind me the same way I always did. Quiet, steady, like the house was still mine to take care of. I got into my truck and drove. Not far at first, just enough to get out of the neighborhood. Away from the streets I knew too well, away from the house where everything had just been laid, out in a way that couldn't be undone. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. There wasn't anything to say yet. After a while, I headed toward a place I'd gone to before, a gravel pull-off about 20 minutes outside of Fayetteville, overlooking a stretch of river that you couldn't really see at night but could hear if you rolled the windows down and sat still long enough. I parked there and cut the engine. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It had weight to it, the kind of quiet that presses in a little, makes you aware of your own breathing, the sound of your hands shifting on the steering wheel, the faint ticking of the engine cooling down. I leaned back in the seat and let it all settle. I didn't feel angry. That's the part people expect, but it wasn't there. What I felt was something closer to understanding, but not the kind that brings comfort, the kind that arrives late, after everything has already played out, and shows you the shape of what's been happening all along. Ryan's words hadn't come out of nowhere. They were built, piece by piece, over years. And Betty's silence in that hallway, that was the confirmation. Not of something new, but of something that had been there the entire time, just out of reach. I stayed there for a long while, long enough for the sky to go from evening to something darker and deeper, long enough for my thoughts to slow down into something manageable. Back at the house, they went on with their night. I know how it must have gone even though I wasn't there. The graduation itself would have been everything Ryan expected it to be. Bright lights, rows of seats filled with people clapping for names they only half heard. The kind of ceremony that feels long while you're in it but becomes a single moment in memory afterward. Larry would have been there, on time for once, dressed right, smiling, taking pictures, standing close enough to Ryan to be part of every frame. There's a certain kind of performance that happens at events like that. Not fake exactly, but selective. People show the parts of themselves they want remembered. Larry was good at that. Ryan, I imagine, was proud. Or maybe just relieved. Either way, the day moved forward without me in it. Dinner came after. More talking, more laughter. Stories being told, some repeated, some new. Larry probably said something that landed well enough for everyone to remember it later. The kind of comment that gets brought up again like it meant more than it did. And then, sometime around midnight, they came home. The house would have felt different the second they stepped inside. Not because anything was out of place, because something was missing. That's the thing about presence. You don't always notice it while it's there, but when it's gone, the space it occupied doesn't just close up. It stays open for a while. The kitchen light was still on. I had left it that way on purpose. Not as a signal, not as a message. Just because it felt right not to leave the place in the dark. The envelope was exactly where I had placed it. On the table, the key resting on top. 2 letters inside. Ryan saw it first. He walked over, probably still carrying the energy of the day, not yet aware that it was about to shift. He picked up the envelope with his name on it. Opened it. The paper inside would have felt heavier than it should. Formal letterhead. Hayes, Greer and Associates. His full name printed clearly at the top. Junior associate position. Starting salary listed without hesitation. Benefits structure. A future laid out in terms that made sense. There was also a handwritten note from Tommy. Short, direct. Confirming that the position had been held open. Not recently. Not as a last-minute decision. For 18 months. Waiting. For him. And then at the bottom, something in my handwriting. 1 line. Simple enough to read quickly, but not something you move past easily. The charger is in the driveway. The key is yours either way. So is the job. I've transferred my recommendation directly. He'll treat you exactly as you deserve. Drive safe, Jacob. No explanation. No reminder of what it took to make any of that happen. No mention of years or effort or sacrifice. Just the facts. Clean. Ryan would have stood there for a second after reading it, not reacting right away. That's how he processes things. Internally first. Always. Then he set the paper down, carefully. Not like it didn't matter. Like it did. He walked to the front door and opened it. The car was there. Dark blue. Exactly the kind he used to look at when he thought no one was paying attention. Parked clean in the driveway. A single ribbon tied to the side mirror. Tommy's wife had insisted on that part. I hadn't argued. Didn't have the energy for it. Ryan stood in the doorway for a long time. Not moving. Just looking. There's a moment when reality doesn't quite line up with what you expected, and your mind takes a second to catch up. That's where he was. Behind him, Betty had opened her letter. Hers wasn't the same. It wasn't about opportunity. It was about truth. She read it once. Then again. Then again. Because some things don't fully land the first time through. I didn't accuse her. That wasn't the point. I told her I understood, that I had seen what she was doing, that I knew where it came from. Fear doesn't need to be explained to someone who's been watching it long enough. But I also told her what it had done, that Ryan had grown up holding distance, not because it was natural to him, but because it had been placed there carefully, consistently, that he deserved the chance to figure out who he was without that weight, and that the one thing she had been wrong about, the one thing that mattered, most was me. I wasn't going anywhere. I never had been. Not once. Not for a second. That part she had misjudged completely, and it had cost something. Not just for me. For Ryan. She finished reading and stood there for a while. The kind of stillness that comes when something inside you shifts in a way you can't immediately respond to. Across the room, Ryan was still at the door, still looking at the car, still holding the key. Eventually, he stepped outside. opened the driver's side door, sat down, closed it. The sound would have echoed just slightly in the quiet of the night. Inside the car, everything was new, clean, untouched. The kind of space that feels like a beginning. He sat there with the letter in his lap and the key in his hand, and he started putting things together. Not quickly, not all at once, but steadily. 8 years old when I came into his life. 14 years after that, every ride, every silent drive, every moment where I was just there. Things he hadn't thought about in years started to surface. Small details, moments that didn't seem important at the time. The way I always showed up, the way I never left early, the way I never asked for anything in return. Memory has a way of reorganizing itself when new information comes in. Things shift. Connections form that weren't there before. Inside the house, Betty was still at the table, the letter in front of her, her hands resting on either side of it, not moving. Not yet. She knew what was happening. Not just outside, but inside Ryan. Because for the first time, there was nothing left filtering it. No quiet comments, no protective distance being reinforced. Just the truth, sitting where it couldn't be moved. And that's when the confrontation began, not with shouting, not with anger, but with realization, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it changes everything. Ryan didn't come back inside right away. He stayed in the car, sitting in the driver's seat with the door closed, the world outside reduced to whatever he could see through the windshield, and the faint reflection of himself in the glass. The key rested in his hand, heavier than it should have been, like it carried more than just the ability to start an engine. He didn't turn it. Not yet. He just sat there, letting everything catch up to him. The letter lay open across his lap. He read it again, slower this time, not scanning, not looking for the main points, actually reading each word the way you do when something matters enough to deserve your full attention. 18 months, that was the part that stayed with him. Not the salary, not the title, not even the car sitting around him. 18 months meant planning. It meant intention. It meant that while he had been living his life, going to classes, spending time with friends, building his future in the way he thought he understood, someone else had been quietly building alongside him, without telling him, without asking for recognition, without making it a condition for anything. Ryan leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes for a moment. Memory doesn't move in a straight line when something like this happens. It jumps. It pulls moments from different years, places them next to each other, and lets you see connections that weren't visible before. He saw the truck parked outside practice fields. Same spot, same time, every week, rain or not. He saw long drives where nothing was said, but nothing felt forced either. He saw the way Jacob never tried to fill silence just to avoid it, never demanded conversation, never pushed, just stayed. He opened his eyes again and looked at his hands on the steering wheel. Then he looked around the interior of the car. Every detail was intentional, not flashy, not excessive, exactly what he would have chosen if someone had asked him directly. But no one had asked. That was the point. The engine still hadn't started, because starting it would make everything real in a way sitting still didn't. Inside the house, Betty hadn't moved much either. She was still at the kitchen table, the letter in front of her, her fingers resting against the paper like she was trying to keep it from slipping away. She had read it enough times to know every word. But understanding it, that was something else. Understanding requires space, and for the first time in a long time, there was space in that house. No noise to fill it. No routine to move things along. Just silence and the weight of what had been said. When Ryan finally came back inside, it wasn't sudden. The door opened quietly. He walked in slower than he had left, not dragging his feet, not hesitating, just measured. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a second. Betty looked up. Their eyes met. There was no immediate reaction, no rush to speak. Ryan walked back to the table and sat down across from her. The envelope was still there. The second letter, hers, still open. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't slam his hand down or demand answers in the way people sometimes do when they feel like something has been taken from them. That wasn't how he worked. He asked one question. Why? That was it. One word. But it carried everything behind it. Not just the night. All of it. The years. The distance. The things that had never been said out loud. Betty took a breath. For a moment, it looked like she might try to hold it together. She had done that for years. Managed situations by controlling what showed and what didn't. But this wasn't something that could be managed the same way. Not anymore. Because I was afraid, she said. Her voice didn't break immediately. It stayed steady for a few seconds longer than expected. Afraid of what? Ryan asked. You getting hurt, she said. Ryan nodded slightly, like he understood the answer on the surface level, but wasn't done with it yet. So you, what? You kept me from getting close. I tried to, she said quietly. He leaned back in his chair, processing. How long? He asked. That question took longer to answer, because the honest answer didn't have a clean starting point. Since the beginning, she said. Ryan looked down at the table for a moment, then back at her. All those things you used to say, about not getting too comfortable, about people leaving? Betty nodded. I thought I was protecting you. Ryan didn't respond right away. He let that sit. Then he asked something that shifted the room in a way even she hadn't been ready for. Did he know? She blinked. Did Jacob know what you were doing? He clarified. That question didn't have an easy answer. Not because she didn't know it, because saying it out loud meant acknowledging something she hadn't fully faced herself. She opened her mouth. Closed it? Then finally, yes. The word landed harder than anything else that had been said. Ryan leaned back again, exhaling slowly. Not sharply. Not angrily. Just deeply. And he stayed anyway, he said. It wasn't a question. Betty nodded. Ryan let out a quiet breath and looked away for a second. That was the moment something shifted inside him. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. Because up until that point, everything he had believed about his relationship with Jacob had been based on a certain understanding that Jacob had stayed because it was easy, or convenient, or expected. Now that understanding was gone, replaced with something else, something heavier, something that required him to reconsider everything. He stood up. Not abruptly, just done sitting. Betty looked up at him. Where are you going? She asked. Outside, he said. He didn't explain further. Didn't need to. He picked up the key from the table and walked back out to the car. This time, when he sat down, he didn't hesitate as long. He put the key in the ignition, turned it. The engine came to life with a low, steady sound. He rested his hands on the wheel again, but this time they didn't feel the same. They felt aware, like everything they touched now had context behind it. He didn't drive right away. He just sat there with the engine running, looking out at the empty street. Doing the math, that's the only way to describe it. Not numbers, not calculations, but a kind of internal accounting. Years. Moments. Decisions. He thought about the times Jacob had been there when he hadn't asked him to be. The times he had taken that presence for granted. Or worse, dismissed it. He thought about the words he had said earlier that night. You're just Jacob. At the time it had felt true. Clear. Now it felt incomplete. Not wrong exactly, but missing something important. He stayed there until the sky started to change. Not fully light. Just that early shift where darkness begins to loosen its hold. Inside the house, Betty hadn't gone to bed. She remained at the table, the letter still in front of her, reading it again without really needing to. Some truths take repetition before they settle. Others never fully do. By the time Ryan turned the engine off and stepped out of the car again, something in him had settled into place. Not resolution. Not yet, but direction. And that was enough for the moment. The fallout didn't come all at once. It rarely does. It unfolded slowly, through conversations that stretched longer than expected, through silences that carried more meaning than words, through the realization that what had been built over 14 years couldn't be undone in a single night, but it could be understood. And once something is understood, it can't go back to what it was before. Ryan didn't call me that night, or the next morning. That didn't surprise me. He wasn't the kind of person who moved quickly through something like that. He needed time to sit with it, to turn it over in his mind until it made sense in a way he could trust. I understood that. I had spent 14 years understanding that. Life didn't stop while he figured things out. I went back to work, back to the road, to early mornings and long stretches of highway where the sky changes color before most people are awake to see it. There's a rhythm to driving that settles your thoughts if you let it. Miles pass, and with them, the sharp edges of things soften just enough to carry. I didn't expect a call. I didn't wait for one either. I had already made peace with what had happened, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that needed closure handed back to me. Just acceptance. I had done what I came to do. I stayed. That was always the point. It was a few weeks later when my phone rang. I was parked at a rest stop just off I-49, somewhere near Kelma, eating something out of a paper wrapper that I wouldn't recommend to anyone. I liked. I saw his name on the screen. Ryan! I let it ring once, twice, not because I was unsure about answering, because I wanted to meet that moment without rushing it. Then I picked up. Yeah, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not awkward, just real. I think I owe you dinner, he said. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Something quieter, something that hadn't been there before. I didn't answer right away, so I let that sit for a second. Then I said, I know a place. You're buying. There was a small laugh on the other end. Not forced, not polite, just natural. And that told me more than anything else he could have said. We met a few days later. A place called Penguin Ed's. Nothing fancy, good food. The kind of place where conversations can happen without feeling like they're being watched. He was already there when I walked in. That didn't surprise me as much as it would have before. He stood up when he saw me, didn't offer a handshake. He hugged me. It wasn't perfect, a little stiff, a little unsure, but it was real. And I knew the difference. We sat down, ordered food, let the first few minutes pass without forcing anything. Then we started talking. Not everything. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood. But enough. At one point, somewhere between the first and second cup of coffee, he looked at me and asked the question I had known would come eventually. Why didn't you ever say anything? I knew what he meant. About Betty. About the distance. About everything I had seen and chosen not to confront. I thought about it for a second. Then I said, because you didn't need me to be right. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? You needed me to be there, I said. That was it. No long explanation, no speech, just the truth. He looked down at his coffee, nodded slowly. Then, after a moment, he said something that mattered more than anything else that day. You were. 2 words. Simple, but they carried 14 years behind them. And that was enough. We didn't fix everything that day. That's not how things like this work. But we started something different, something honest. Since then, we meet for lunch once a month. Sometimes the same place. Sometimes somewhere new he wants to try. He usually picks up the check. Says he's working through the backlog. I let him. Not because I need him to, because it matters to him. And I understand that. We talk about work, about cases he's handling, about things he's figuring out as he goes. He listens more than most people. Always has. That's going to make him a good lawyer. One of the rare kind. The kind who pays attention. The photograph from the county fair sits on his desk at the firm. Tommy told me that. Said it hasn't moved. Files come and go around it, but the photo stays exactly where it was placed. I keep a copy in my truck, tucked above the visor on the passenger side, where I can see it when the sun comes up and hits the road just right. Him at 11, laughing without holding anything back. Me just off to the side, watching. At the time, I didn't have a name for what I felt in that moment. Now I do. It wasn't about being called Dad. It never was. It was about being there. Consistently, without conditions, without needing recognition, just showing up. Betty and I have talked since then. More than I expected. Some of it was hard, some of it necessary. She made her choices out of fear. And fear, if you hold onto it long enough, has a way of shaping things in ways you don't intend. She was trying to protect her son, but in doing that, she created a distance that didn't need to exist. And by the time she realized it, it was already there. I don't carry bitterness. There's no point. Bitterness is heavy, and I spend my life on the road. I don't have room for extra weight. Ryan is finding his way now, on his own terms. That's what he needed all along. Not perfection, not a clean story, just the chance to understand it fully. Sometimes, early in the morning, when the road is empty and the sky is just starting to change, I think about the first time I met him. 8 years old, small, careful, shaking my hand like he already knew how the world worked. And I think about everything that came after that. The silence, the distance, the years. And I come back to the same thought every time. I'm glad I stayed. I never needed anything more than that. Not a title, not recognition. Just the quiet knowledge that in the end, he would remember. That someone was there, and that it mattered.